I have this memory of me as a child, somewhere around 4 or 5 years old, and going to school and mentioning to my classmates that I had visited my dad in jail. My father was a young dad to 2 children under 3 years old. He was sentenced 7.5 to 15 years, but that was a norm in the community that I was living in.
Black and brown people in these communities get arrested more often. They have more convictions and end up spending more time in prison due to the sentencing laws in New York State.
It was like, 2 weeks after I turned 17, I was incarcerated. You know, I didn't even enjoy the blessings of being 17.
At the age of 20, although I had never spent any time in prison, I was staring at the possibility of never ever making it out.
When I went into that prison in 1984, I wasn't sentenced for the nature of my crime. I was sentenced because of the color of my skin.
New York's sentencing laws are fundamentally racist in nature, and black and brown people get longer and harsher sentences because of mandatory minimums and prior convictions. Since Jim Crow days, black and brown people have been targeted for mass incarceration. But it's only been within the last 50 years that the sentencing structures have created this crisis of mass incarceration that we're in today.
My father's long sentencing was the result of the over-punitive Rockefeller drug laws. What could have been a shorter sentence of anywhere from 1 to 3 years wound up being nearly a decade.
The Rockefeller drug laws were created to be harsh on drugs, but what they did was left remnants of 2 and 3 strike laws and mandatory minimums that are still in place today. A mandatory minimum is a sentence that a judge is required to impose, whether or not he feels there are mitigating circumstances. The judge may want to impose a lesser sentence, but can't do so.
When I entered the system, the minimum sentence was 15 years to life. The judge thought that was too much. He wanted me to plead guilty to a reduced charge, but he needed the prosecution to agree with it, and they refused.
The prosecutors will dangle these heavy, heavy sentences over your head and expect you to play ball and take a plea bargain. If you have a prior conviction, you face New York State's 2 and 3 strike laws, which means that you face even harsher mandatory minimums than you would have before.
The prosecutor has entirely too much power. These long-term sentences, you destroy a person. You take all kinds of hope out of them.
And yet the attitude in the public has shifted. The public is aware of the damage that mass incarceration has caused, but our sentencing scheme still reflects the failed policies of the 1990s.
Even in our own communities, it's the fear that the law will not be implemented fairly.
Over the past 50 years, New York State has been building this system of mass incarceration that has been disproportionately carried on the backs of black and brown people. And it's time for us now to dismantle that system of oppression. Communities Not Cages is a statewide campaign building the power of people and their families who've been impacted by mass incarceration to overhaul New York's racist and draconian sentencing laws. We are fighting to eliminate mandatory minimums so that prosecutors won't have the ability to coerce plea deals. We're also fighting for a second look.
Second look legislation is going to allow folks who serve a certain amount of time in prison, no matter what their sentence might be, to petition a judge for resentencing.
It's time for judges to be able to go back into these sentences, take a second look at what a person's conviction was, and find out if they're still in alignment with what the sensibilities of society are now. A young person that went in at 21 and comes out at 45 is not the same person, and they have learned, they've evolved, they've grown, and instead of just being subject to punishment, their time should be meaningful. And good time and merit time are things that a person earns while they're there, while they're changing their lives.
There are people that are being held in prison who have atoned. They could be out here in society helping us do a lot of the work that we do.
My father's incarceration robbed my sister and I of the father and daughter relationship that we deserved. And it took over a decade to reestablish that relationship after he was released from prison.
There are no throwaway people. People can actually commit a crime, but another word for crime is a mistake.
You don't have to lock everybody up and put them in a cage.
What the Communities Not Cages campaign is going to fight to do is to decarcerate by ending these draconian sentencing laws and invest in community-based programs that actually bring safety to our communities. Nothing has ever changed. No legislation, no oppression, nothing has ever changed until the voices of the people who have been mostly impacted say, we're not going to take it anymore.